What's up, addicts? Welcome to the Fantasy Addiction Network. We went on to another fantasy panel with a very weird fantasy football. These guys are awesome. Check them out on YouTube and Instagram. Link in the description. But in this video, we went through all of the coaching changes across the NFL, going through and determining what we think this means for different players' fantasy values. It was an awesome discussion. But hey, if you guys are new to the channel, before we get started, please hit that like and subscribe button. It really does help me out a lot. Anyway, not going to waste any more time. Let's get into the panel. Before we get started, check out the link in the description. We are offering a free tail kickoff special for our fan companion tool. You get access all the way up into the kickoff of the NFL season for absolutely free, so make sure you check out that link.
What is up, weirdos? Welcome back. Coming at you live from a safe distance from everybody else because we are kind here at a very weird fantasy football. I've got everybody here today. I've got my partner in crime, Jake Gullett. He is actually at the firehouse today. So those who know us know that Jake is a firefighter. He's a fireman at heart, and he's a fireman by trade. So he is on the bottom right. Say hey, Jake.
How's it going, guys? Looking forward to this.
Yes, so this is going to be actually our third show that we have done. We brought another group of fantasy experts, is what we're going to call them. That's the first time that we've had Fantasy Football Insight on the show. So Fantasy Football Insight, why don't you give us a second, tell us about yourself, and give us what you're all about.
Hey guys, I'm Garv, and I run Fantasy Football Insight on Instagram. And what I do is I try to post both redraft and dynasty content. And I opened up my channel about like a week ago. And yeah, that's about it.
Okay. Yeah. Well, it's good to have you. Where can we find you on Instagram?
It's just FFInsight at FFInsight.
Okay, well, it's a pleasure having you. And back, everybody wanted him. Everybody wanted some more of him. We're giving them to you. Fantasy Addiction Network.
What's up, guys? Just as before, find me on YouTube mostly at Fantasy Addiction Network. So pleasure to be back on. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you did fantastic the last time. Love your insights. Love your content. I read it every single day, and I really appreciate all of our dialogue that we have throughout the week. For those of us who do not know us, say we're picking up these new fans of these gentlemen here, we are a very weird fantasy football. Prior to going national, I guess is what we're going to call it, with YouTube and podcasts through anywhere where you consume your podcast. We were doing ESPN Radio in Springfield, Missouri, and now we're keep on trucking along. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about the coaching changes in the NFL and how it affects the fantasy implications of players on their teams. So let's just get right into it because that's what we're here about. First things first, we're going to talk about Jake's favorite team. That's a joke. Dallas Cowboys. So as we know, they got rid of Jason Garrett, who we might actually talk about Jason Garrett a little bit later on. And they were replaced with who, Jake?
Mike McCarthy.
That's right.
Yeah, this is an exciting one because, I mean, he's a Super Bowl winning coach. He came from Green Bay, kind of has that weird teeter-totter from the Mike Holmgren days. And he's just one of those guys that he's a known winner. And I hated that he went to the Cowboys because as an Eagles fan and here in Missouri, most Chief fans hate the Cowboys. This is no doubt going to help their situation. Jason Garrett was a train wreck. So Mike McCarthy knows how to win, and he knows how to use the players that he has. He knows how to exploit the best out of these guys. And so I definitely see the Cowboys being a front runner for taking first place in the NFC East.
Fantasy addiction. So knowing what we know of McCarthy in his past, he's a throwing first type of guy for the most part. How do you think that affects Dallas's fantasy implications?
Well, first I'll give a quick shout out to Jake. I think you're in a better situation than you think. So I'm a Packers fan. I've been following Mike McCarthy for a very long time, and I'm firmly of the belief that Mike McCarthy rode on Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers' coattails for a very long time. He's a guy that lied in his meeting about watching all the game film, admitted like a week after that he didn't do nearly anything of what he said. So he's not an analytics guy. Their offensive coordinator is going to help them. He's saying that he's going to let him call plays, but he said that before in Green Bay, and he just took over halfway through the season. And we really saw the fallout over the past couple of years with Aaron Rodgers basically losing all desire to play football. And a lot of that had to do with his relationship with Mike McCarthy. So this is going to be a really telling sign as to who was really the main culprit to what was happening over there in Green Bay. But overall, from a fantasy perspective, the fact that they do still have Moore there as the offensive coordinator, I don't think it's going to hurt their offense too much. Obviously, they lost Byron Jones as cornerback, but overall, last year, their offense was one of the better ones in the league and was really potent for fantasy. Mike McCarthy has made some bonehead decisions in the past, and he's always been much more of a conservative play caller, but that's not that Jason Garrett wasn't any of those things either. So I really feel like this is kind of a wash when it comes to fantasy. I don't feel like there's going to be a huge downgrade to any position, really.
Fantasy Football Insight, what do you think about this hiring?
So I think that Mike McCarthy will allow for the Dak Prescott, Michael Gallup, and Amari Cooper's fantasy values to rise a little bit. Mm-hmm. But I don't think we'll see as big of a jump with Blake Jarwin as we would have had with a different coach, because McCarthy doesn't really use his tight ends that often in the offense.
That's actually really good insight that I hadn't thought much. Did I cut you off there?
No, that's fine.
Okay, let me run it back to Fantasy Addiction being a Green Bay fan. So you would know, is that accurate when it comes down to the tight ends? Is he really not a tight end guy?
I mean, it's accurate in terms of throughout the years. Mm-hmm. I believe the last time we had a really successful tight end in Green Bay with Mike McCarthy was way back with Jermichael Finley. Mm-hmm. But again, that might be more of a Aaron Rodgers preference thing. So we'll see. Blake Jarwin started to show a little bit of promise last year. Mm-hmm. I'm probably more on the side of Fantasy Football Insight here. I wouldn't really trust Blake Jarwin in this year, but I do still think he's a cheap dynasty ad. They just gave him a contract. They're going to have him for a while. Jason Witten just left. So he's more of a upside prospect for the coming years. Probably not someone I would look at and redraft this year.
So Jake, do you think this hurts Zeke and his fantasy implications?
I don't see how it could. I mean, looking back, I know that Fantasy Addiction talked about riding the coattails of Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers, but also think about the Ahman Green days and who he had, going in this last couple of 2 or 3 years. From what I saw from Zeke, to answer your question, Zeke did not perform. It was just the typical thing where you get paid and then you don't show up to play. These kids or these guys play their hearts out to get the big contract. And then when they finally do, I wasn't impressed with Zeke last year at all. I went to a couple of the games down there in Dallas, and especially the Vikings game, he got shut down. And the Vikings defense, it wasn't really that great. But I don't know. I do know that Mike loves to pass the ball deep down the field, which is why Fantasy Football Insight talked about the tight ends and not using tight ends. So are you going to punch me? What's going on here?
Knife to your head. Knife to your head. So up or down this year, or stay the same? Just knife to your head.
I think you're going to get the same out of Zeke as you have.
Okay. All right. Well, I like that. Some hard, fast data and some opinions there as well. So, real quick, 30 seconds or less, Fantasy Addiction. What up?
I'm just curious if you think the loss of Frederick finally retiring, if that's going to hurt Zeke at all.
I think that would affect just as much or more than any regime change. I mean, frankly, he's one of the best centers of our generation. And you can't replace somebody like that. Now, there is some centers that's coming up. I mean, some really good centers that should be around in the second round. And that's where I would go if I was Dallas, in the second round. But definitely, Zeke really makes or breaks that offense. And so, in my opinion. So, yeah, that totally affects. And as you can see in our rankings, I dropped Zeke down a couple slots. So, Fantasy Football Insight, you raised your hand.
Yeah, so I think that Ezekiel Elliott will have a small step back because I expect that with Mike McCarthy, we might see a little bit more of Tony Pollard because he does like to use multiple backs in the backfield.
Oh, he's a fancy jerk like that, isn't he? No. All right. So just like that. That's actually really good too. I appreciate you bringing that up. Let's go from one old-time quarterback coach to another. So Washington brings in Ron Rivera of boring fame. I mean, let's face it. Ron Rivera is boring when it comes to fantasy players. So he goes to Washington. We do know that Ron Rivera is a stickler. He's a tough guy. He's intense, and he doesn't take a lot of crap. And I don't know what's going to happen with Haskins. What do you guys think is going to happen when it comes to the implications with Washington? Anybody?
I'll go.
Mm-hmm.
I think Rivera is a decent, as you said, kind of like a disciplinarian for this team that has had, I mean, you saw last year with the discussion between the medical team lying about things that were going on there, just not good locker room presence. I do think Ron Rivera can help with that. But as you mentioned, very boring from a fantasy perspective. I think he only had three winning seasons in his 8 years in Carolina. So, I mean, it's not great. Overall, I don't really know that they're going to see a massive improvement, but it might help with the locker room chemistry a little bit. The quarterback situation, I think, is a mess because Haskins didn't really show us much of anything last year. And then they traded for Kyle Allen, which everyone, I believe, agrees was kind of a hose trade that the Panthers got way more value out of that deal. So I still feel like they're going to address this position, either going after a guy like Cam Newton, maybe because Ron Rivera has a lot of experience with him, or maybe going after Tua in the draft. What do you guys think? Do you think they actually go into the season with their current quarterback situation as is?
Well, it said a lot when it comes down to Rivera trading for Kyle Allen and not Cam Newton. So I think we could just squash all of that right now. But with that said, anytime that there is a new coaching change and there is a young quarterback, that's a fantasy disaster. What do you think, Jake?
I've never been a fan of Ron's. He sits there with that stupid look on his face. It's so smug. He sits there like deer in the headlights, like that just happened. But that's the constant from him. Like you said, he's so boring and you don't know what you're going to get. But really, Washington is a terrible place. So why not put a guy that has only 3 winning seasons there, has a terrible quarterback, really doesn't have a quarterback situation. That's why I would not draft any. I don't care how good Scary Terry is.
Yeah.
If Ron Rivera's there, I don't see Washington being at all. I don't think they win 4 games this year. That's my prediction.
I mean, really, not much defense, not much offense. Fantasy Football Insight. Who do you think is the starting quarterback by the end of the year in Washington? Is it Allen or is it Haskins?
So I've been looking into the Ron Rivera situation and like the Redskins quarterback situation. And from what I've heard, I think that the rumors of them potentially taking Tua are false. I think they're trying to find a person to trade down with and potentially take like a cornerback or a safety there. So I do think that Haskins will start off, but then it'll depend on how he performs.
But I tell you what, that doesn't seem like a Daniel Snyder type of move. He likes those headlines, but it'll be interesting to see. So let's go to the new kids on the block, but way cooler than the new kids on the block. We're going to talk about, let's see, the Giants got Joe Judge. So Joe Judge is he started out okay, but we got this man named Jason Garrett as the offensive coordinator. He's clapping his hands. Fantasy addiction analysis. Hit me.
I figure we have the boring guy now in Washington. We have the clapper in Dallas, and we have red-faced Mike in Dallas. So I'm like, I feel like as an Eagles fan, you guys should be really pumped right now. But this hiring really surprised me, and I feel like he's going to be under a lot of pressure. I believe it was about a day ago, or maybe it was even today. like news came down the wire that apparently Gettleman was told that, hey, you basically have a year to right this ship or you're out. And whenever a general manager gets that edict, that note on their desk, they start making desperate moves. We're about to come up to the draft. I don't know what the Giants are going to try to do, but when you're fighting for your job, you tend to do some stupid things. I feel like that's just going to put a lot of pressure on Joe Judge to try to perform in year one, which, especially when you're in the middle of a rebuild, you have a brand new quarterback in Daniel Jones getting healthy. They haven't really addressed anything to their offensive line, which was pretty abysmal last year. I think it's going to be really hard for them to find success in this first year. If they'll actually be able to turn things around, if they replace Dave Gettleman with a more competent general manager, I think things in the future could be better, but I think this is going to be a really rough year for the Giants.
Jake, 30 seconds or less. Do you think that the Garrett signing helps the offense? And do you think it's going to be a run-first team? Give us some clarity.
So. I think that we saw that in Dallas with Zeke. With Daniel Jones being, this is his second year, I don't see them really being really affect in the NFC East. You're talking about a guy that's been a special teams assistant coordinator and then kind of a both last year, a wide receiver and I just don't think this is the right hire. And then you bring in Jason Garrett, who is he's terrible. He is terrible. He's the guy that puts the clipboard under his arm and claps like he says, and then that's it. Like, way to go, guys! That was great 3 and out. That was great 3 and out. Maybe next time.
That's awesome. So, and I really appreciate that, because really that dude is a walking meme. That's all. That's the best analysis that we could say. Inside 30 seconds or less.
So I made a video over this a couple days ago on my Instagram, and I think that the Judge Ed signing will help Slayton take the next step. So for Dynasty, I think that he's a really good buy low right now. And then I do think that this will be a run-first team, because when Joe Judge was asked like how he would like to run the offense, the first thing he said is that we need to know how to run the ball and we have to run it well. So I think that they'll likely run it a lot. So Saquon will be a nice, he'll be a top 2 running back.
Okay. Yeah, definitely Saquon's a top 2 running back, no doubt about it, and I appreciate that. So let's, in the interest of time, let's kind of run through a couple more of these. So we have Cleveland, who obviously they had the last regime was a disaster. Let's call it what it is. Now they bring in Kevin Stefanski. Is that how you say the name? Stefanski? Stefanski. All right, so everything that was happening, and Jake, keep your mic unmuted, because let's me and you have a conversation here. So everything that Cleveland was showing, they showed that they wanted to be a run-first team. They spend a ton of money on a running back, on an offensive tackle. They're shoring everything up, and then they bring in a guy who really, what is he? He's a poor Baker.
This guy has quite the resume. He's been with the Minnesota Vikings for 13 years, and he's done every single job. Like, to me, this is your GM for the future. So I know they already have their own GM there, but what I'm saying he was an assistant head coach, he was a quarterback coach, tight end coach, running back coach, went back to being a quarterback coach, interim offensive coordinator. So he's done everything there's possibly to do on the offense. And I think with Cleveland, they have exactly what everybody would want: a halfway decent gunslinger quarterback. You got some really good wide receivers in Jarvis Landry and OBJ. Then you have this tandem with Chubb and Kareem Hunt. If they're going to keep Kareem Hunt, man, they have all the tools they need to be a winning. Like, Cleveland was there 2 years ago, if you remember. They were fighting, and next thing you know, last year they did not show up.
They lost their identity.
They really did.
That's what I'm saying. What is their identity? So now you have a third-year quarterback, and you mentioned what Baker Mayfield is. He's kind of an okay quarterback. How would you like to be known as the kind of an okay quarterback? He now has 3 coaches in 3 years. Fantasy Addiction, I know that they signed Hooper. What is Stefanski going to be? I mean, do you know anything about this guy, aside from all of the steps that he's taken?
Well, I mean, if we've seen anything from the way that he instituted, from the moment he took over the offensive coordinator position after they let go of the offensive coordinator, I believe he took over in 2018.
Mm-hmm.
So from that half of the season on, we saw a huge drop in Kirk Cousins' targets. And then basically the entire of 2019, it was a heavy run first team. Now, I think a lot of that had to do with Zimmer, but I think Stefanski was perfectly chosen for that job because of the way that he wanted to run that team. I think Jake hit the nail on the head in just talking about how this guy is like an organizational presence. And I really think that's what the Browns are trying to do, is get someone with a winning mentality, someone that is a stable mind, not someone that, I mean, there were rumors that Freddie Kitchens would basically abandon the game plan halfway through the game because he didn't feel like it was going the way that he thought it was going to, and just completely threw everything out. So, I mean, I'm going to give everyone on the Browns a pass last year, including Baker Mayfield, because we saw a lot of promise from him in his first season. Last year, he was running for his life. They got Jack Conklin, so that hopefully they'll have a little bit better protection for him. They're going to run the ball a lot more and not rely on him as much. So as long as they can stay within winning range of games and don't get blown out, they're not going to ask Baker to do nearly as much. At first, I wasn't a huge fan of this, but the more I think about it, I don't think this is great for fantasy, but I think it's really good for the Browns organization.
I think it's good for the running game for Cleveland. What do you think, Inside? 30 seconds or less.
So from this change in coaching, I think that it's horrible for fantasy completely, because even though Chubb might get more work, I think that Hunt is like almost as good of a talent. So he'll be getting the passing down back and he'll get all of like the catches. So Chubb won't have the receiving upside. And then touchdowns will be split between the entire team because they've got way too many mouths to feed, especially with the Hooper signing. I think it completely hurts Jarvis Landry the most because I feel like Hooper and Jarvis Landry will be trying to get the same targets.
Well, we do know that Hooper is a red zone target, so you're definitely giving away some of those red zone opportunities to Hooper. So obviously Stefanski comes from Minnesota. Minnesota replaces him with Kubiak, which is much the same. So we don't have to go too much when it comes down to the offensive coordinator. Now, we'll spend a few minutes on this one. We're running a little short on time, but the Panthers, they signed a whole new offensive coaching staff. The hot tickets. The hot tickets. Jake, you've already unmuted your mic. Hit me, baby. One more time.
No coach comes from college straight into the NFL and does a good job. It's impossible. This guy has a good resume. His last 20 years of doing coaching this and that through mostly in college. So, yeah, he came in with the Giants as an assistant offensive lineman coach. I don't see him doing it. I know he did great for Baylor. I watched him. I'm a Big 12 guy.
Lame. Yeah.
So, he did great for Baylor. But look what Chip Kelly did when he came into I think the only coach that did okay, like a Bill Callahan maybe, or Pete Carroll, he's done okay. But Pete Carroll
he did okay. He was a coach before. He was a head coach before he went to USC.
Yes, that's true. But so he kind of knew that, but I just don't like it. I don't think that's Carolina is so different. It's hard to put my thumb on or my finger on what's going to happen in Carolina because he could be a great coach and I could be an idiot here, or he can come in and totally fall on his face with a new quarterback and a whole new regime, and people may be pissed about how they handled with Cam and all that jazz. So we'll see.
We do know that he is. Is it Rule? Is that how you say it? Like, it's Rule, right?
Yeah, so, he's cousins with Ja Rule.
Yeah, and best friends too with Ja, with my buddy Ja. So we do know that he is an offensive mind. He gets the ball out quickly. He has a lot of intermediate stuff, some hidden deals going underneath. So do you think that it hurts the deep wide receiver cores that they got in? I mean, they brought in the Robbie Anderson, who's a deep guy. It doesn't really, in my opinion, doesn't really fit Rule's MO. What do you think, Insight?
Another thing that did happen is that they brought in Teddy Bridgewater, and he isn't known for slinging the ball down either. So I don't really understand why they brought Robbie Anderson. but I feel like Robbie Anderson and Curtis Samuel will both be taking the same targets again, so both of their values will likely fall. And DJ Moore, I don't think he'll be affected by it as much because he's in the slot, and like with the other two like deep threats, he'll get more of the like the slot passes, like the first down passes, just to get like the quick 7-8 yard pass and just get it, like get a new chain of downs and just keep going on.
So going off that mindset, fantasy addiction, does this hurt McCaffrey?
I don't think it hurts at all.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, people love to call Teddy check down. If anything, I think his passing volume will remain about the same.
Yeah.
And we saw last year, I mean, pretty much everything went wrong that could have possibly went wrong for that team.
Mm-hmm.
Lose your starting quarterback, defense plays terribly. You're constantly coming back from games. Kyle Allen was like nowhere near a comparable quarterback, and he still almost broke the fantasy scoring record for a single season in points. So, I mean, barring just wearing him completely down, I don't really think that there's anything slowing this guy down. From what Fantasy Football Insight said, I do think that DJ Moore is also going to be used pretty heavily here. He's more of that yards after catch guy that should, be targeted more on the short and intermediate routes, and he can make a lot on those passes. And we saw in the short time with Teddy Bridgewater last year, he still kept Michael Thomas very heavily involved. So look for them to use DJ Moore similarly. I mean, I think the reason why they brought Robbie Anderson is just because Matt Rule has experience with him back in Temple.
That's a really good point. I had forgotten about that. So, Jake, I see you're unmuted. Do you have something? You have something to roll with?
I was just going to talk about C-Mac. I see his stock going down fantasy-wise here because Bridgewater is a mobile quarterback. And if he – because I did call the 1,000-yard receiving, 1,000-yard rushing this year with C-Mac, but I don't see that happening this year. I think Carolina's going to fall before they're going to have to ride that ship where they're going to not be so good, and then they're going to come out of it maybe late in the season, but then definitely look for him do much better in 2021.
Well, certainly he's not going to put up 470 points again. But even if he drops, that's still a healthy guy. Fantasy addiction.
Yeah, he has a healthy way to go and still be the number one by far. But so one question I have for you, I know Teddy has been known as more of the running quarterback, but last year we saw he barely had any rushing yards at all.
He can't
move. Do you think that has anything to do with the fact that that gruesome knee injury that he suffered? Do you think he's playing more like a pocket quarterback, or do you think that was just the system?
Unequivocally, I watched him heavily, and the man, he just can't move. It wasn't like one of those guys where you're just going to tuck the ball and start to run. No, he did everything that he could to not move. What do you think, Jake?
Look at Drew Brees. I think it was a system thing. I really do. He came in and won 5 games, but he stayed in that pocket the whole time. I don't know what he is on his physical side from the injury, but he looked good, man. He did his checkdowns like we talked about, and I think he's a system quarterback. So we'll see how Carolina does in protecting him. And I'm looking forward to seeing what Carolina does.
Well, Teddy was most effective when he was out of the pocket. He just didn't want to tuck and run. One thing that I do think will be beneficial is I suspect there will be less turnovers this year. And there was a lot of points that were leached away from themselves from turning the ball over. Fantasy football addiction, real quick.
Yeah, I just wanted to say one thing I do want to remember as we're going through this is how bad their defense already was, and then losing Luke Kuechly. Said Ja Rule before, I really think this defense is going to be the fire festival of the NFL. So that's going to be a really important fantasy note too, is play players who are going against Carolina.
I don't know if this is the rapper, but y'all going to make him act a fool? No? Is that the right guy? No. All right. Yeah, I'm a rocker, dude. All right, so let's play a little game. Oh, well, first, before we do that, so Bruce Arians came out, and I want to get the exact quote. So let me see if I can find my phone here, because I screenshotted this bad boy, talking about the tight end this year, O.J. Howard. And bear with me. This is bad live. So he actually says today, he came out and said that his eyes should light up with Tom Brady's arrival, talking about O.J. Howard. So we know that O.J. Howard, he was asked to stay in and block. But now Bruce Arian is giving us a little bit of a carrot in front of us, saying that, hey, his eyes should light up now that Tom Brady is there. Do you think that they're going to allow him to actually run? Or are they going to stick around and have him block? What do you think about this? Anybody? Insight.
So I'm not going to take the hype this time because, again, he's being hyped up like last year.
Yeah.
And he proved that he wasn't going to live up to his potential. And I think that's more because of Bruce Arians. And he definitely does have the talent. But I don't think that Bruce Arians' system is going to help O.J. Howard, even though Tom Brady supposedly likes his tight ends. Because as we've seen in the past, he only used the tight ends when Gronk was there, when he had arguably like one of the best tight ends of all time.
Mm-hmm.
And then like last season, if you look at it, the New England Patriots were 32nd in targets to tight ends. So he might not get as big of a bump as people do think.
So let's just go to Fantasy Addiction real quick. Give us 10 seconds or less. Do you trust him? What Bruce Arians says right here.
I think he's just trying to light a fire under his butt, but as Insight said, Gronk was the main reason why he went to him, and Brady's never played with both Godwin and Evans before, so it's not like he really needs Howard. I think he'd do a little bit better than last year, but the moment he does terribly, you're going to want to cut him, and like you're just going to be kicking yourself the moment he has a bad game. So he'll probably have like 5 great games, and the rest will be like, why did I pick this guy?
Jake?
I think that Tom Brady's going to have a hard time facilitating the ball and feeding those egos. And so I think with, like we're talking about with O.J. Howard, yeah, I mean, his eyes should light up because you can see what Brady did with Gronk, as everybody's been saying.
Aaron Hernandez.
Tom Brady loves the tight end. And so I think he needs to be patient.
In a non-weird way.
Yeah, exactly. So I just think, well, we'll see, man. It could be one of these guys that shows up, and next thing you know, he's the next Mark Andrews. Who knows? Come out of nowhere and just be a stud tight end.
All right. So we're going to do a this or that segment real quick. Basically, I want to give you guys 2 names, and you decide, all variables included, who you would rather have. Of course, the most important variable would be average draft position, yada, yada, yada. So number 1, I got Kyler Murray or the aforementioned Tom Brady. Real quick, Fantasy Football Insight.
I think I'll go Tom Brady on this one because in the mock drafts I've done, Kyler Murray is shot up into like 3rd, 4th round range, and that's way too early for me. I'd rather take Tom Brady in like round 12 or 13.
Jake?
I'm going to go Kyler Murray with the addition to Hopkins. It's just going to make Fitzgerald even better. So Kyler Murray.
He was throwing you a bone there, Addiction. Who do you want, Kyler Murray?
I love Kyler Murray this year. I think he's going to be the Lamar Jackson breakout candidate for this year. But it's too hard for me to take a quarterback in the 4th round, so I'm going to have to take Brady just based on that price.
I'm the same. I prefer Tom Brady. When it comes to a young quarterback and having that many mouths to feed, sometimes they tend to feed that ball a little too much and it gets a little too cute, as we had just seen with Baker Mayfield. Still love Kyler Murray. It's my 3rd quarterback this year, but I would rather have Tom Brady. So now we have Michael Thomas or Emmanuel Sanders, teammates. Jake, go.
Michael Thomas. He's not going to get 149 receptions, but he'll get so many targets this year. He's probably going to break at least 125 receptions.
Caveat, would you draft Michael Thomas in 1.5? So 1st round, 5th overall draft pick, as his average draft position is.
No, there's too many wide receivers. I'm a run back heavy kind of guy.
Okay, so you would rather have Michael Thomas over Emmanuel Sanders, who's going approximately in the 9th round?
That's a really good point.
We'll come back to you.
Yes, please do.
Addiction.
Also take Michael Thomas. I've actually found a lot of success taking wide receiver in the first round, especially if you're like he falls a little bit. If you have a couple extra people that take running backs, you get them around the 1.6, 1.7. You can normally double that up. There's a lot of decent running backs in the third round, like your guy Marlon Mack. So if I can still nab 2 good running backs after him, locking down that receiver position with Michael Thomas. The thing that scares me about Emmanuel Sanders is we just saw him completely fall off the cliff towards the end of the year. Basically was non-existent in the playoffs. So for the 49ers. So I just don't know how much juice he has left in him. He'll probably have a few good games where we'll all feel stupid for not taking him, and then we'll have forgotten who he was by week 10.
Fantasy Football Insight.
I really like Michael Thomas, but I always go running back heavy at the top of the draft, so I'd have to lean with Emmanuel Sanders way later.
All right, so each one of you, 10 seconds or less. David Johnson or Hopkins? Jake, right.
I'll never draft David Johnson. You know me on that one.
Addiction.
I have to take Hopkins.
Insight.
I think I'll go against the norm and go with David Johnson because I think that he'll do a lot better in Houston, and I don't like when wide receivers change teams.
Agreed. That's my analysis right there, verbatim, actually. And I can't quit David Johnson. It's so bad. I'd rather have David Johnson in round 5 or round 4 than I would Hopkins in round 1. This was awesome, guys. It was great. Tell us where you can find you again, Fantasy Addiction.
Find me on YouTube, Fantasy Addiction Network. About ready to start unleashing our pre-draft player breakdown videos, giving you guys some insight. Pretty pumped for that. Getting our website fired up for rookie draft, so keep you posted there. But yeah, check us out on YouTube.
Fantasy Football Insight.
Yeah, I'm just on Instagram, and it's FFInsight, and yeah, and I'm right now doing the recap of all 32 teams for the offseason moves they've done so far, so please check me out.
Will do. Jake, where can you find us? 30 seconds or less, buddy.
Big one on Spotify, obviously YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. We're hitting them real hard on the YouTube channel, which is what you'll see this post here. So like, share, subscribe, tell everybody about us. We're taking on the world one day at a time.
Ride with us or collide with us. Thank you, guys. Love you all in a weird way. Take care.